When people talk about Incoterms, they usually focus on one question: who's responsible for the shipment? It sounds simple, it isn't, because Incoterms aren't really about shipping, they're about risk allocation. That's what this video is about. Most people treat Incoterms as logistics shorthand. Three letters, drop them into a contract, move on. EXW, FCA, DDP, done. But Incoterms aren't boilerplate. They're a structured framework for allocating cost, risk, and responsibility in a sale of goods. And they were designed for a very specific context: international trade. Incoterms were created by the International Chamber of Commerce to solve a cross-border problem. Different countries, different legal systems, different assumptions about delivery, risk, and obligations. They standardize answers to questions like: when does risk transfer? Who arranges transport? Who handles export clearance? Who pays for what leg of the journey? In international sales, that clarity is invaluable. Incoterms are great at what they're meant to do. The problem is what happens when we import them, unchanged, into domestic contracts. Because domestically, most of the complexity they're designed to manage doesn't exist. No export formalities, no import clearance, no border risk, no clash of legal systems. Yet the Incoterms still brings all of that conceptual baggage with it, which leads to friction. Not because Incoterms are wrong, but because they're often more precise than the deal requires. And precision without shared understanding doesn't reduce risk. It creates it. Here's the key misunderstanding. People think Incoterms define the deal. They don't. They define delivery point, transfer of risk, allocation of certain costs. They do not define transfer of title, payment terms, carrier liability, remedies. What happens if something goes wrong after delivery? Those gaps matter more domestically, not less, because domestic law already fills many of those spaces. Commercial codes, implied terms, industry norms. When you layer Incoterms on top without thinking, you can end up duplicating, conflicting with, or obscuring rules that already exist. And that's where deals get vexing. Take a simple domestic shipment: one seller, one buyer, one carrier, same country. The real business questions are usually straightforward. Who pays the freight? When does risk pass? Where is delivery deemed to occur? You don't need an internationally harmonized rulebook to answer those. Often, plain language does a better job. Risk passes on delivery to buyer's warehouse. Seller arranges and pays transport. Title passes on payment. No decoding required. No Incoterm commentary. No surprises when something goes wrong. Contrast that with an Incoterm dropped in casually. FCA seller's facility. Sounds clear, but now you need to ask, which FCA obligations actually matter domestically? Are people assuming customs responsibilities that don't exist? Does the operations team interpret this the same way legal does? Does the carrier contract align with the assumed risk transfer? That's not simplification. That's abstraction. And abstraction is expensive when it breaks. This isn't an argument against Incoterms. They're excellent. They're elegant. They're robust, used where they're intended. But domestically, they're often a solution looking for a problem. And when commercial teams use them, because that's what we always use, they sometimes trade clarity for convention. The real goal isn't to sound sophisticated. It's to align expectations, to make sure that when reality diverges from the plan, everyone understands who bears the loss, why, and whether that outcome was priced into the deal. If Incoterms achieve that, use them. If they don't, don't. Contracts aren't about importing frameworks. They're about allocating consequences. And sometimes the most commercial choice isn't the most standardized one. It's the one everyone actually understands.